The moment my mother-in-law leaned across the dinner table and said those words, something inside me shattered. 5 years of failed treatments, 3 miscarriages, and countless nights crying myself to sleep had already left me raw. But hearing Margaret declare that my barren womb made me less of a woman than her other daughters-in-law turned that pain into something else entirely. "I just don't understand why James wouldn't want a real family," she continued, wine glass swirling in her manicured hand. "Adoption is fine for some people, I suppose, but don't you want him to have children of his own?" The dining room fell silent. My husband James froze beside me, fork suspended midway to his mouth. His sisters exchanged nervous glances, while their husbands suddenly found their dinner plates fascinating. My father-in-law, Richard, continued eating as if nothing unusual had been said. I placed my napkin beside my barely touched dinner and stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My hands were trembling, but my voice remained steady. "Thank you for dinner, Margaret. I think it's time for us to go." James snapped out of his shock and stood beside me, his face pale with anger. "Mom, what the hell?" Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. If Emily can't give you children, maybe you should reconsider your options before rushing into adoption." The family dinner had started like any other Sunday gathering at the Peterson household. Margaret had prepared her famous pot roast, Richard had poured the wine, and the conversation had flowed easily around work promotions, neighborhood gossip, and the newest additions to their extended family. James's sister Beth had just announced her 3rd pregnancy, and his other sister Melissa had shown everyone new photos of her 6-month-old twins. Then Margaret had asked about our adoption nonsense, and everything had unraveled. I'd endured 5 years of their subtle digs and backhanded comments about my infertility, the Christmas card that only mentioned real grandchildren, the constant questions about when we'd give up on having our own, the suggestions of fertility doctors as if we hadn't already seen the best specialists in the state, the way Margaret always positioned me at the opposite end of any family photos from the children, as if my inability to conceive might be contagious. But this was different. This was saying the quiet part out loud in front of the entire family. "You don't mean that," James said, his voice low and dangerous. "Take it back right now." Margaret sighed dramatically. "I'm only thinking of you, sweetheart. 38 isn't too old to start over. David at church just had a baby with his new wife, and he's 45. I felt James's hand find mine under the table, squeezing it tightly. I knew what that squeeze meant. We're in this together. But in that moment, I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. "Emily and I are leaving," James announced, "and we won't be back until there's an apology. A real one." As we walked to the car, the cool evening air did nothing to calm the fire in my chest. James kept apologizing, his words tumbling out in a frantic stream. "I can't believe she said that. I'm so sorry, Em. She had no right. We don't have to see them again until she apologizes properly." But as I slid into the passenger seat, something became crystal clear to me. This wasn't just about an apology. It was about something much deeper. "James," I said quietly as he started the car, "I don't want your parents involved in our adoption." He looked at me, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. I don't want them meeting our child. I don't want them at the placement. I don't want them having any part in this journey." James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. I know my mom was horrible tonight, but cutting them off completely? They're still family." "Are they?" I asked, tears finally breaking free. "Because tonight your mother made it very clear that in her eyes, I will never be a real part of this family. And any child we adopt won't be either." The car remained parked in the driveway, the engine humming quietly as we sat in silence. James looked torn, caught between the family he was born into and the one we were trying to create. "Let's go home," he finally said. "We'll figure this out." But as we drove away, I knew something had fundamentally changed. This wasn't just another hurtful comment to be brushed aside. This was the moment I decided to protect not only myself, but also the child we would someday welcome into our home. The next morning, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the adoption agency's paperwork we'd been filling out. Under extended family support, I'd previously listed James's parents as potential childcare providers, people who would be involved in our child's life. Now I deleted their names. James came up behind me, setting a cup of coffee by my hand. "I called Mom this morning," he said quietly. "She said she was just concerned about us, that she didn't mean it the way it came out." I kept typing, not looking up. "That's not an apology." "I know," he sighed, sitting down across from me. "I told her so. She said she's sorry if you were offended." "If I was offended?" My fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. "James," she said I was less of a woman. She called our future child not real family. "There's no misinterpreting that." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times when he felt conflicted. I know. I'm not defending her. They're my parents, I can't cut them off completely." "I'm not asking you to cut them off," I said carefully. "I'm saying I don't want them involved in our adoption process. I don't want them around our child until they can demonstrate that they'll treat them as a true grandchild, not some consolation prize." The weight of my words hung in the air between us. For 5 years, we'd endured the fertility treatments, the disappointments, the grieving together. We'd held each other through each failed pregnancy test, each miscarriage, each crushing conversation with doctors. When we'd finally decided to pursue adoption 6 months ago, it had felt like emerging from a dark tunnel into sunlight. Until last night, when Margaret had tried to drag us back into the darkness. "Okay," James said finally. "We'll keep them away from the adoption process. But eventually we'll need to figure out what role they'll play in our child's life." I nodded, feeling both relief and sadness. "Eventually, but not now. Right now, I need to know that you're with me on this, that you understand why this matters so much." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm with you. Always." That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling thinking about the journey that had brought us here. I'd met James in graduate school, both of us studying education. We'd fallen in love over coffee and textbooks, sharing dreams of teaching and raising a family together. After graduation, we'd found jobs at neighboring schools, bought our modest 3-bedroom house with the perfect backyard for children, and started trying for a baby immediately. We'd been so naive, so certain that our bodies would cooperate with our life plans. When the first year passed without a pregnancy, we told ourselves it was normal. When the second year passed, we sought help. Tests followed, revealing unexplained infertility, that frustrating diagnosis that meant something was wrong, but no one could pinpoint exactly what. Then came the treatments, each more invasive and expensive than the last. The hormones that made me feel like a stranger in my own body. The scheduled sex that turned intimacy into a clinical task. The brief, glorious hope of 3 pregnancies, each ending before we could share the news with anyone beyond our closest friends. Through it all, Margaret's comments had grown increasingly pointed. "My friend's daughter got pregnant right after they adopted. Maybe that would work for you." Or, "Have you considered a surrogate? At least then the baby would be partly James's." Or the most cutting, "I hope you don't regret waiting so long to start trying." Women today put careers first and then wonder why their bodies won't cooperate. James had always defended me, always assured me that his mother didn't mean it badly. But last night had exposed the truth we'd both been avoiding. In Margaret's eyes, my worth as a daughter-in-law was tied to my ability to give her biological grandchildren. Well, I was done trying to earn her approval. The next morning, I called our adoption agency and requested a meeting without telling James. When Sharon, our caseworker, greeted me in her warm office, filled with photos of families she'd helped create, I got straight to the point. I need to make some changes to our paperwork regarding family involvement, I explained. My husband's parents will not be part of the process. Sharon nodded, her expression professional but compassionate. That's absolutely your choice. Can I ask if this is a mutual decision between you and your husband? I hesitated. He knows my feelings on this. We're still working through some details. She studied me carefully. Emily, as your caseworker, I need to understand the family dynamics at play here. Adoption is a stressful process, even with full family support. Without it, there can be additional challenges. Something about her gentle tone broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything, the years of subtle digs, the painful family gatherings, and finally, the devastating comment that had pushed me past my breaking point. When I finished, Sharon leaned forward. Thank you for sharing that with me. It sounds like you're setting a boundary to protect both yourself and your future child, which is completely valid. But I do need to emphasize that you and James need to be aligned on this decision. We are, I insisted, even as doubt crept in. At least, we're working on it. That's good, she said, because the home study will involve interviews about family support systems, and any significant disagreements between you could complicate the process. I felt a flutter of panic. Our home study was scheduled to begin in just 2 weeks, the final major step before being matched with a birth mother. We'd been waiting so long, had come so far. I couldn't let Margaret's cruelty derail us now. James and I are on the same page about what matters most, I said firmly. Creating a loving, secure home for a child. As I drove home from the meeting, I realized I needed to talk to James again. Really talk, not just exchange tired arguments late at night when we were both too exhausted to think clearly. But when I pulled into our driveway, I was surprised to see his car already there. He usually didn't get home from school until after 5, and it was barely 3 o'clock. Inside, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, an unfamiliar envelope in front of him. His expression was unreadable. You're home early, I said cautiously. Mom came to see me at school today, he replied, his voice flat. She gave me this. He pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a check for $30,000, exactly the amount we'd calculated we needed to complete our adoption. She says it's to help us with the adoption costs. A peace offering. I stared at the check, feeling suddenly cold. And what does she expect in return? James's jaw tightened. She says nothing, that she just wants to support us. James, I said carefully, your mother has never given anything without strings attached. You know that. He sighed heavily. She also wants to host a baby shower once we're matched. And she wants to be at the hospital when we pick up the baby. There it was, the quid pro quo, wrapped in the guise of generosity. By her way back into the process with money we desperately needed. No, I said, pushing the check back toward him. Absolutely not. It's $30,000. Do you know what that means for us? We could stop draining our savings. We could use that money for the baby's future. At what cost? I asked. The right for her to undermine me as a mother? To make our child feel like they're second best, not a real grandchild. James stood up, frustration evident in his body. She made one terrible comment that revealed how she truly feels. I interrupted. James, this is just her trying to buy access. If we take this money, we're telling her that she can say whatever hurtful thing she wants and then just throw money at the problem. He paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. So what's your solution? Cut them off forever? Never let them meet our child? They're the only grandparents our baby will have. My dad hasn't done anything wrong. Your dad sat there and said nothing while your mother told me I was less of a woman, I reminded him. He's never once stood up for me in 5 years. He's not confrontational, you know that. Being not confrontational when someone is being cruel isn't a neutral position. It's taking the side of the person being cruel. We stared at each other across the kitchen, the tension palpable. This wasn't like our usual disagreements. quick flares that burn themselves out easily. This felt fundamental, a crack in the foundation we'd built our relationship on. I had a meeting with Sharon today, I finally said, about removing your parents from our adoption paperwork. His eyes widened. Without talking to me first. After talking to you last night, I countered, when you agreed they shouldn't be involved in the process. I agreed we should pause things until they apologize properly, not that we should erase them completely. The hurt in his voice was genuine, but so was mine. James, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about our child. What happens when your mother makes comments about our baby not being a real grandchild? What happens when she treats them differently from their biological cousins? I can handle her cruelty toward me, but I will not let her hurt our child. James sank back into his chair, the fight suddenly draining from him. She wouldn't do that to a child. Wouldn't she? I asked softly. The woman who told me my infertility makes me less of a woman. He didn't answer, and I knew he was remembering all the small comments, the subtle ways his mom had already shown how she felt about adoption. The way she sent him articles about the dangers of not knowing a child's genetic background. The time she'd referred to our potential adoption as buying a baby. The Christmas card where she'd written about her hopes for more real grandchildren in the coming year. I don't want to hurt you, I said, sitting down beside him. And I don't want to come between you and your parents. But I need to know that you'll protect our child from feeling unwanted or less than, even if that means setting firm boundaries with your family. He looked at the check, still sitting on the table. What should I do with this? Return it, I said firmly. Tell your mother that our family isn't for sale. He nodded slowly, and I felt a surge of relief that quickly faltered when he spoke again. I'll return the check. But, Em, I need you to understand something too. They're still my parents. I can't just cut them out of my life completely. I'm not asking you to, I assured him. What I'm asking is that we present a united front about what's acceptable and what isn't. That we agree on boundaries and stick to them even when it's hard. That we put our child's emotional well-being above everything else, including your parents' feelings. James took my hand, his expression solemn. I promise I'll protect our child. I promise I'll stand up to my mom when she crosses the line. But I also need to find a way forward that doesn't completely sever my relationship with my family. I knew this was as much as I could ask for now. The deeper work, the recognition that his mother's behavior wasn't just occasionally insensitive but consistently harmful, would take time. The home study was coming up, and we needed to be on the same page, at least outwardly. Okay, said, we'll find a way forward. Together. But as I looked at the check on the table between us, I wondered if that was truly possible. If James could really see his mother for who she was, rather than who he needed her to be. And if I could trust him to put our future child first when it mattered most. That night, I dreamed of a little girl with dark curls and serious eyes, looking up at me and asking, Am I really your daughter? Grandma says I'm not. I woke up with tears on my face and a renewed determination in my heart. No matter what it took, I would protect our child from feeling like they didn't truly belong, even if it meant making the hardest choices of my life. 3 days later, James returned the check to his mother. I wasn't there for the conversation, but when he came home, his expression was a mixture of sadness and resolve. It's done, he said simply. I told her we couldn't accept money with conditions attached. How did she take it? I asked. Not well, he admitted. She said we were being ungrateful and foolish, that she was just trying to help. I nodded, not surprised. And your dad? He told me to apologize to you. That mom went too far. James looked at me hopefully. That's something, right? It was something, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Still, I nodded, not wanting to push James further right now. It's a start. With the home study approaching, we needed to focus on presenting ourselves as the stable, loving couple we'd always been before infertility and adoption had put such strain on our marriage. We spent the next week carefully organizing our home, collecting financial documents, and practicing how to talk about our parenting philosophies and support systems. When Sharon asked about extended family during our first home study interview, James smoothly explained that while his parents lived nearby, we're being intentional about establishing ourselves as an independent family unit first. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I squeezed his hand gratefully, and we moved on to discussing our community resources and friend network instead. As we progressed through the home study process over the next month, James and I found a fragile peace. We agreed that his parents would not be present when we received our child, whenever that might be. We agreed that any visits would be supervised, at least initially. We agreed that any disrespectful comments about adoption would result in an immediate end to the visit. It wasn't perfect, but it was a framework we could build on. Then came the call that changed everything. Sharon's excited voice on the phone, telling us about a birth mother who had selected our profile. Rebecca, 19 and 7 months pregnant, wanted to meet us as soon as possible. The baby, a girl, was due in just 8 weeks. Suddenly, our abstract discussions about boundaries became very concrete. This wasn't just a hypothetical child anymore. This was a real baby girl who would be here before we knew it. "We need to talk about my parents again," James said that night. "For real this time." I nodded, my hand resting protectively over the ultrasound photo Rebecca had shared with us. "I'm listening." "I want them to know their granddaughter," he said carefully, "but I need them to respect that you're her mother in every way that matters. I need my mom to understand that any comments questioning that will not be tolerated." I studied his face, looking for any sign of wavering. "And if she can't do that? If she makes jokes about who her real mother is, or talks about how she doesn't have Peterson blood?" James's jaw tightened. "Then we leave. Immediately. And we don't go back until there's a genuine apology and a change in behavior." I took a deep breath. "I need you to be the one to enforce this, James. I can't always be the bad guy." "You won't be," he promised. "This is my line in the sand, too." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. As Rebecca's due date approached, the stakes felt higher than ever. 2 weeks later, we met his parents for lunch at a neutral restaurant, our first time seeing them since the disastrous dinner. Margaret was subdued, offering a stiff apology that sounded rehearsed, but was at least an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Richard surprised me by speaking up. "We want to be part of this child's life," he said, his gruff voice uncharacteristically emotional. "Whatever we need to do to make that happen, we're willing to listen." I wanted to believe Richard's words, but 5 years of experience had taught me to be cautious. Still, the lunch ended better than it began, with tentative plans for them to visit after the baby was home and settled. Not at the hospital, not during placement, but some weeks later when James and I had found our footing as new parents. As we walked to our car, James squeezed my hand. "That wasn't so bad, right?" I gave him a small smile. "We'll see." The next 6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. We finished the nursery, attended parenting classes, and met with Rebecca several more times. She was a quiet, thoughtful young woman who had made the agonizing decision to place her baby for adoption so she could continue her education. Each time we met, I felt both profound gratitude toward her and a lingering fear that she might change her mind. Meanwhile, James maintained limited contact with his parents. Brief phone calls where they asked about the baby's due date and whether we needed anything. Margaret sent a box of baby clothes that had belonged to her granddaughters, a gesture that felt both kind and somehow pointed. A reminder of the biological connections I couldn't provide. I put the clothes away without comment. This wasn't the time to pick battles. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca was in labor, 2 weeks early. James and I rushed to the hospital, hearts pounding with anticipation and terror. What if something went wrong? What if Rebecca changed her mind at the last minute? What if I wasn't ready to be a mother after all? When we arrived, Rebecca's social worker met us in the waiting room. "She's asking for Emily," she said to my surprise. "Just Emily." James squeezed my hand. "Go. I'll be right here." I followed the social worker to Rebecca's room, where she lay breathing heavily through contractions. When she saw me, she reached out her hand. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, her voice strained. "Without James." I sat beside her, taking her hand. "What is it?" She gripped my fingers tightly as another contraction hit, then spoke when it passed. "I need to know that you'll love her like she's yours, that you won't ever let her feel like she doesn't belong." The intensity in her eyes made my throat tight. "I will love her with everything I have," I promised. "She will always know how wanted she is, how chosen she is." Rebecca studied my face. "My mom gave me up," she said quietly. "But then she had more kids and kept them. I grew up knowing I was the only one she didn't want enough." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want that for my baby." In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what Rebecca was really asking. She wasn't just seeking reassurance about my love for this child. She was asking if there would ever be more wanted children in our future, biological children who might make her daughter feel less chosen. "Rebecca," I said, holding her gaze steadily, "I can't have biological children. We tried for years, and it's not possible for me. This little girl, your daughter, our daughter, will be our only child. She will never, ever feel like she was second choice." The relief in Rebecca's face was immediate and profound. She nodded, another contraction beginning. "Stay with me." I stayed. For the next 6 hours, I held her hand, wiped her forehead, and advocated for her with the medical staff. James peeked in occasionally, bringing ice chips and offering support. But respecting that for whatever reason, Rebecca had chosen me to be her birth partner. At 9:42 that night, Lily Margaret Peterson came into the world, a tiny, perfect being with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival with impressive volume. The nurse placed her in Rebecca's arms first, an important moment of connection before the separation to come. I stood beside them, tears streaming down my face, as Rebecca whispered private words to her daughter. Then, with trembling hands, Rebecca held Lily out to me. "Your turn," she said softly. Nothing could have prepared me for the feeling of holding our daughter for the first time. The weight of her in my arms, the smell of her downy head, the way her tiny fingers curled around mine. It was overwhelming in its perfection. James joined us, his own tears falling freely as he touched Lily's cheek with reverent fingers. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's really ours." Rebecca watched us from the bed, her expression a complex mixture of grief and peace. "You'll send pictures? Letters? Like we talked about?" "Every month," I promised. "And we'll tell her from the beginning how brave her first mom is, how much you love her." The next 24 hours were a blur of paperwork, social worker visits, and Rebecca's heart-wrenching final goodbyes. We had agreed on an open adoption with regular updates and occasional visits when Lily was older, an arrangement that felt right but didn't make the immediate separation any less painful for Rebecca. When we finally brought Lily home 2 days later, our house felt transformed, not just by the physical addition of baby equipment, but by the profound shift in our identity. We were parents now. After years of longing and loss, we were finally a family. The first few weeks passed in a sleep-deprived haze of feedings, diaper changes, and simply staring at our daughter in wonder. Friends brought meals and gifts. My parents, who lived across the country, booked flights to visit the following month. James's sisters sent congratulatory texts, but kept their distance, perhaps uncertain where they stood in the current family dynamic. And James's parents waited as agreed, respecting our request for space during the initial adjustment period. Or at least that was the plan. 3 weeks after Lily came home, the doorbell rang during her afternoon nap. I opened it to find Margaret and Richard on our doorstep, arms laden with gifts. "Surprise!" Margaret chirped. pushing past me into the house. We couldn't wait another minute to meet our granddaughter. I stood frozen in the doorway, a cold wave of betrayal washing over me. We had been clear about our boundaries. James had promised, and yet here they were, uninvited and unannounced. Margaret, Richard, I managed to say, my voice tight. This isn't a good time. We're still adjusting and Lily's sleeping. Margaret waved away my objection. Oh, we won't wake her. We'll just peek at her. I brought her the most darling little outfit for pictures. She was already halfway to the nursery, Richard trailing behind her with an apologetic glance in my direction. I followed, panic rising. Please, we agreed you'd visit later when we're more settled. Don't be silly, dear, Margaret said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she approached Lily's room. I'm her grandmother. I have a right to see her. The word, right, sent a surge of protective anger through me. I stepped between Margaret and the nursery door. No, I said firmly. You don't have a right. You have the privilege of being in Lily's life if you respect her parents' boundaries. And right now, you're not doing that. Margaret's expression hardened. James said we could come today. He said you'd be fine with it. I blinked, momentarily thrown. Had James really gone behind my back? After everything we'd discussed? That's not possible, I said, though doubt crept in. We agreed you'd visit next month. Richard cleared his throat. There may have been a misunderstanding. James mentioned you were both exhausted, and we offered to bring dinner. The pieces clicked into place. A well-intentioned comment from James, twisted by his mother into permission she hadn't actually received. I think you should leave, I said quietly. I'll have James call you later to reschedule. Margaret's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We drove an hour to get here. We brought gifts and dinner, and you're turning us away? What kind of daughter-in-law are you? The kind who keeps her promises to her husband and protects her child, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The kind who expects the same in return. Just then, a thin wail came from the nursery. Lily was awake, her nap cut short by the raised voices. Margaret immediately moved toward the sound, but I blocked her path. No, I said firmly. Not today. Please leave now, or I'll have to ask James to come home from work. Richard put his hand on Margaret's arm. Margaret, let's go. This isn't the right time. For a moment, I thought she might argue further, but then she thrust the gift bag she was carrying into my hands. Fine, but James will hear about this. After they left, I sank to the floor outside Lily's room, shaking with adrenaline and anger. I picked up my phone to call James, then set it down again. This conversation needed to happen in person. When he came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, Lily asleep in her bassinet beside me. I'd rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm and reasonable while expressing my sense of betrayal. But when I saw his face, tired from work, but lighting up at the sight of Lily, all my careful words evaporated. Your parents showed up today, I said flatly. Uninvited. James's expression shifted from confusion to dismay. What? Why would they do that? They said you told them they could come, that you said I'd be fine with it. He sat down heavily on the couch. I never said that. Mom called yesterday asking how we were doing. I mentioned we were exhausted and hadn't cooked a real meal in days. She offered to bring dinner sometime. I said that would be nice eventually, but we needed more time. I believed him. I knew how Margaret operated, how she turned vague statements into firm commitments that suited her agenda. She tried to see Lily, I said. I had to physically block her from going into the nursery. James ran his hands over his face. I'm so sorry, Em. I should have been clearer with her. The apology helped, but it wasn't enough. This is exactly what I was afraid of, I said quietly. Your mother ignoring our boundaries, twisting your words, pushing her way in. And it's only going to get worse as Lily gets older. He nodded slowly. I know. You're right. But what do you want me to do? Cut them off completely. The question hung in the air between us. Was that what I wanted? To sever Lily's connection to her grandparents entirely? To force James to choose between his parents and us? No, that wasn't fair to anyone, especially Lily. I want you to set firm, clear boundaries, I said finally. Not vague statements she can reinterpret. I want you to tell her exactly what will happen if she crosses those boundaries again. And then I want you to follow through, even when it's hard. James moved to sit beside me, taking my hand. What specific boundaries do you need? No unscheduled visits. Ever. No comments about Lily not being our real daughter or me not being her real mother. No comparisons to her cousins or talk about bloodlines or DNA. And absolutely no undermining our parenting decisions. He nodded, squeezing my hand. That all seems reasonable. And one more thing, I added. If she crosses any of these boundaries, the visit ends immediately. No second chances. No, she didn't mean it that way. We pack up and leave, or we ask them to leave. This was the hardest part, the real test of James's commitment. Would he actually stand up to his mother in the moment, or would he make excuses for her, as he had so many times before? I promise, he said, his voice steady. Those are our boundaries, and I'll enforce them. The next day, James called his parents and had the conversation we'd discussed. I could hear Margaret's voice rising through the phone, even from across the room, her indignation clear. But James held firm, repeating our boundaries calmly and clearly until she finally seemed to accept them. When he hung up, his expression was a mixture of sadness and resolve. She's not happy, he said unnecessarily, but I think she understood I was serious. Thank you, I said simply. 2 weeks later, we invited Margaret and Richard for their first official visit with Lily. I spent the morning anxious and on edge, rearranging things in the nursery, changing Lily's outfit twice, preparing responses to any potentially insensitive comments Margaret might make. When they arrived, Margaret was subdued, her usual confidence dimmed. She handed me a small package. A peace offering, she said quietly. Inside was a delicate silver frame with a photo I recognized. James as a baby, cradled in Margaret's arms, her expression one of overwhelming love. Next to it was an empty frame, waiting for a similar photo of me with Lily. I thought you might want to put them side by side, Margaret said. Different journeys, same love. It was unexpectedly thoughtful, an acknowledgement of my role as Lily's mother alongside her own motherhood journey. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Thank you, I said, meaning it. The visit went better than I had dared hope. Margaret cooed over Lily appropriately, asked respectful questions about our adoption experience, and even thanked me for being so patient with Rebecca during the birth. Richard, usually quiet, shared stories of James as a newborn, creating connections between past and present without emphasizing biology. As they were preparing to leave, Margaret asked hesitantly, "Would it be all right if we came again next weekend? We could bring lunch." I looked at James, who nodded slightly. "That would be nice," I said. "Around noon." Over the next few months, we settled into a cautious routine. Margaret and Richard visited every other weekend, gradually earning my trust with their respectful behavior. There were occasional missteps. Margaret once referred to Lily as almost like a real Peterson before catching herself, but they were quickly addressed and sincerely apologized for. Slowly, I began to relax my vigilance. Maybe this could work after all. Maybe Margaret had truly accepted Lily as her granddaughter in every way that mattered. Then came Lily's christening when she was 6 months old. We'd planned a small ceremony at our church, followed by a gathering at our home. Both sets of grandparents would be there, along with James's sisters and their families, our closest friends, and Rebecca, who had requested to attend. The morning of the christening, I was dressing Lily in her special gown when Margaret arrived early to help with preparations. I could hear her chatting with James in the kitchen as I finished getting Lily ready. "Such a big day," I cooed to Lily, who gurgled happily in response. "Everyone who loves you will be there." "She looks beautiful," Margaret said from the doorway. "May I come in?" I nodded, still focused on fastening the tiny buttons on Lily's gown. Margaret crossed to stand beside us, reaching out to touch Lily's dark curls. "She has Rebecca's hair," she observed. "Same color, same texture." I tensed slightly but kept my voice neutral. "Yes, she does. Rebecca has beautiful hair." Margaret was quiet for a moment, watching as I gathered Lily into my arms. Then she said, "It must be strange for you, having her birth mother at the christening." "Not strange," I corrected gently. "We want Rebecca to be part of Lily's life. It's important to us and to her." Margaret said, her tone light but her words pointed. "I just wonder if it might confuse Lily someday, having her real mother around. Children need clear boundaries, you know." The room seemed to freeze around us. After 6 months of careful progress, here it was again, the subtle undermining, the deliberate word choice designed to wound. I took a deep breath, remembering our agreement. "Margaret," I said carefully, "Rebecca is Lily's birth mother, not her real mother. I am Lily's mother in every way that matters legally and emotionally. If you can't respect that, then I'm afraid you won't be able to stay for the christening today." Margaret's expression hardened. "I'm just stating a biological fact. You're being overly sensitive again." "It's not about biology," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It's about respect. For me, for James, for our family, and for the boundaries we've clearly communicated." "Family," Margaret scoffed. "You keep using that word. But family is about blood, about DNA. You can pretend all you want, but it doesn't change the facts." And there it was, the truth beneath 6 months of careful behavior. Margaret hadn't changed her views. She'd just gotten better at hiding them. Until today, when the pressure of the formal ceremony, the presence of Rebecca, and perhaps her own unresolved feelings had caused the mask to slip. I stood up, Lily secure in my arms. "I need you to leave," I said quietly. "Now." "Don't be ridiculous," Margaret protested. "The christening is in 2 hours. Everyone will be arriving soon." "Yes," I agreed. "And you won't be among them unless you can sincerely apologize and commit to never making comments like that again." She looked genuinely shocked, as if it had never occurred to her that there might actually be consequences for crossing our boundaries. "You can't be serious. You'd keep me from my granddaughter's christening over a simple comment." "It wasn't simple, and you know it," I replied. "And yes, I would. We would." I gestured toward the doorway, where James now stood, his expression grim. He'd heard everything. "Mom," he said quietly, "you need to go." Margaret turned to her son, clearly expecting him to take her side. "James, surely you can talk some sense into your wife." James moved to stand beside me and Lily, his hand coming to rest protectively on my shoulder. "Emily is right. We've been clear about our boundaries from the beginning. What you said was hurtful and disrespectful, not just to Emily, but to our entire family." "I was just." "No," James interrupted firmly. "There's no excuse. Either you apologize sincerely and commit to respecting our family, or you won't be at the christening today." Margaret looked from James to me to Lily, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally calculation. "Fine," she said stiffly. "I apologize if my comment offended you. Obviously, I consider you Lily's mother." The apology was hollow, devoid of genuine understanding or remorse. I looked at James, wondering if he would accept this bare minimum effort for the sake of family peace. He surprised me. "That's not good enough, Mom," he said firmly. "A real apology acknowledges the hurt you caused and shows that you understand why it was wrong. It doesn't include the word if." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. I've been walking on eggshells for months, carefully watching every word I say. One little slip and suddenly I'm banned from my granddaughter's christening? What kind of cruel, controlling person does that make you, Emily?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and revealing. James's hand tightened on my shoulder. "That's enough," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You need to leave now, Mom. We'll talk about this after the christening." "If I leave now, I won't be coming back," Margaret threatened, clearly expecting this ultimatum to force our capitulation. James didn't hesitate. "That would be your choice, not ours. We've made our position clear." For a moment, Margaret seemed frozen in disbelief. Then she turned and stormed out, calling for Richard to follow. We heard the front door slam a moment later. James and I stood in silence, Lily oblivious to the tension as she played with the lace on her gown. Finally, James spoke. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I really thought she'd changed." I leaned into him, letting his arm wrap around Lily and me. "I know. I wanted to believe it too." The christening went ahead as planned, with a noticeable absence in the front row of the church. Richard called just before the ceremony to apologize for his wife's behavior and his own departure, explaining that he felt he needed to be with Margaret right now, but that he hoped to see Lily soon. Rebecca sat in the front row instead, her quiet presence a testament to a different kind of love, one based not on ownership or blood, but on genuine care for Lily's well-being. At the reception afterward, James's sisters approached me hesitantly, clearly uncertain where they stood in the family drama. "We heard what happened with Mom," Beth said awkwardly. "We want you to know we don't share her views. Lily is our niece, period." Melissa nodded in agreement. "Mom's always been traditional, but that's no excuse. We're here for you guys, whatever you need." Their support meant more than I expected. For years, I'd felt like an outsider in the Peterson family, tolerated but never truly accepted. Now, ironically, it was Margaret who had placed herself on the outside by refusing to accept our terms. That evening, after all the guests had left and Lily was asleep, James and I sat on the porch swing, processing the day's events. "Do you think she'll ever come around?" I asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. James sighed heavily. "Honestly, I don't know. Mom's never been good at admitting when she's wrong. But I do know that we did the right thing today. We protected our family, you, me, and Lily." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "I never wanted to come between you and your parents." "You didn't," he said firmly. "They made their choices. We made ours. And I choose you and Lily every time." The weeks that followed were quiet. Richard visited alone once, bringing a small gift for Lily and an update that Margaret was taking some time to reflect. James's sisters made more effort to stay in touch, inviting us to family events and making it clear that Margaret's views were not shared by everyone. 3 months after the christening, as we were preparing for Lily's first Christmas, a letter arrived from Margaret. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope, the careful, controlled script that matched her carefully controlled exterior. James and I opened it together after Lily was in bed, neither of us quite ready for whatever it might contain. "Dear James and Emily," it began, "the past 3 months have been a time of difficult reflection for me. Richard has been patient but firm in helping me see how my behavior and words have hurt you both, and potentially Lily as well." The letter continued, acknowledging specific hurtful comments she had made over the years, from my early infertility struggles through Lily's adoption and beyond. She wrote about her own mother's rigid views on family and legacy, and how those had shaped her thinking in ways she hadn't fully recognized. "I cannot undo the pain I've caused," she wrote, "but I can promise to do better moving forward. Emily, you are Lily's mother in every way that matters. James, you have been right to protect your family, even from me. I hope someday you can forgive me enough to allow me back into your lives, but I understand that trust must be earned, and I have much work to do." The letter was signed simply, "With love and regret, Margaret." James and I sat in silence after reading it, both processing the unexpected depth and apparent sincerity of Margaret's words.